Welcome back to Danny Rant. This week we have a very special guest. Like every week we have a special guest. Across from me we have a Melbourne techno icon, legend, DJ, producer, label owner, nightclub entrepreneur. The list goes on, Mr. Simon Digby.
It's a lot to swallow, isn't it? And
How
big shoes to fill after Rafi.
Yeah, Rafi, I didn't even know his story went that deep. It just kept going and going and
Yeah.
It was unreal. It was like fucking opening a pack of Pokemon cards and finding like a...
Well, look, I patched in for that one, and it just hearing, because I was very much involved in what was going on then, it was like bringing back a lot of memories, you know? So it was really, let's say, nostalgic.
Yeah, for sure.
To hear him and Gav as well.
Yeah,
you know?
Gav's story is awesome.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
So we talk about the 90s, like especially those podcasts we covered that.
Yeah.
Where do you start? Where does Simon Digby come in as a punter? Where do you get into dance music? Where do you get into techno? Like how does that start? And where's your journey begin into the next 40, 50 years of your life?
Yeah, it's big question. I'd have to acknowledge my old man, my dad, for this, because he, and as you know, I've got my brother Jason, you know, so we were exposed to music at a very young age. And from there, we both started our own journey. So from there, went from playing at parties, like I DJ'd at my school social, you know, so DJing was just, it felt like it was always a part of my life. You know, I was DJing probably, you hear, you know, on resumes, on bios, you know, I started DJing when I was 12 or whatever. But, you know, really 15, 16 is when we were playing tunes for private parties, school socials, birthday parties. So it really started from there. And then that's when it just evolved, you know. Jason had his own career with DJing. I had my career. My career was different to Jason's, and it was kind of really interesting because there was never two brothers that were DJing in a small town, you know, like Melbourne.
Yeah, true.
So it was really interesting, especially as the younger brother, you know, like my brother was, you know, him, Sean Quinn, Frankie D, Megan, Casey, these guys were like headlining every club, you know, Mansion, Fantasia, yeah, legendary clubs. So Chasers, of course. So there was a club scene, and they were pretty much at the forefront of that club scene. So for me, trying to make an impact in the clubs was kind of very challenging, you know. So that allowed me to, actually, funny story, this one, Rafi, who's I consider one of my best friends. I remember approaching Rafi saying, I want to DJ, you know, in one of your clubs. And he goes, yeah, you're Jason's brother. I'm like, yeah. He goes, mate, you can't have two Digbys on a bill, you know? Doesn't look right. And at that point in time, I was actually going to change my DJ name, right? So I wasn't known as Simon Digby. I was going to call myself something like, I won't say, it was funny, Junior D. Because back then, a lot of DJs had aliases.
Yeah, of course.
You know? But that then made me explore, what do I really want to do? What do I really want to play? What do I really love? And first and foremost, I was a punter. You know, I used to just love going out and hearing music and really escaping, which is what a club really is, you know. A club is escape, you know, and that's why clubs like Bergheim, you know, have caught the world by storm, because you're in the moment and you feel safe in that moment, you know, because there's no phones. So for me, my clubbing days really was twofold. It was clubs, so I'd always go see my brother play at the Mansions or wherever these clubs were, but I also had a real love for the underground scene. And that underground scene was, it's funny, has anyone mentioned Temple?
Yeah, I like no more so comments. Like people will hit me up on stuff being like, talk about Temple, talk about Temple. And I'm like, I'm gonna get to all of them eventually. Just wait.
Temple was the one for me, right? You know, there was the rave, like the dance party culture, which was biology and all those things that Mark and Hess and Richie were doing early stages. But Temple for me was iconic. You know, it was a club in the city. It was underground, no doubt about it. It was only people that. People like Michael Hutchins, if he was going out, you know, or Bono, these are kind of people that went to Temple. But it was 3 levels, and one level was full techno, other one was garage, and the other one would have been, I know Gavin and Arlen used to play at one level, Guy up here, and then you go upstairs, and it was Dr. John, your Frankie D's. So there was 3 rooms, like a garage room, a house room, and a techno room.
And where was it?
It was in the city. It was probably, I'm not going to say we're honky tonks, but some laneway.
Yep.
It was really a door, you know, that kind of thing. So Temple was one club that really bought, if you love music, and it wasn't labelled. You know, you just go to this club to hear good music and you knew what level you wanted to be on, you know. Backdoor was another club that I got exposed to at a really young age.
I've actually never even heard of that one.
Backdoor, no.
Nah.
There's a guy called Collins XE54 and very big in the design gay community, which was very cutting edge, you know. And they were like underground parties that I can't remember if it was regular or they would once a month, but these were pushing underground music that was only getting played overseas, New York or UK. And I think Melbourne had a big influence on UK and UK house and New York house as well.
Why do you think that is? Like you talk about, you know, different cities around the world, like you said, Berlin, you know, Detroit, New York, UK. You're talking at a time when there was no social media, there was no YouTube. You couldn't just look up what was going on down another city.
Yeah.
How the fuck does it filter into this little place in the middle of nowhere at the bottom of the world?
I think Melbourne's very cultured. You know, like I know I come from a family of migrants. You know, so there's always like I'm a first generation. So I think a lot of people travel. You know, and I think through travel. And I think the music brings the world together, you know, like-minded. So, for example, when I had the record label, I won't jump too far ahead, but, you know, if we made a track, we'd have to send out acetates, you know, or promo records. So it was very analog kind of way of promoting music. But I think it's probably just people travel, you know, and that's why the design community and the creatives usually are the birth or creation of these kind of clubs or institutions.
For sure. And that makes total sense. They bring in, they see something, they want to replicate it, they build it in the city.
It's like design, you know, it's like music's creative, you know? So whether it's come from Stockholm or wherever, design's design, music's music, you know? So it travels.
So you, techno, right? You're talking about the sort of, I'm guessing kind of early 90s. So it's early 90s, the techno sort of starts to hit and you guys start to grasp it and play it?
No, what happened with me personally, how this, I suppose, runs parallel with the music scene, let's say. But I had because the club thing was, I had to choose another avenue.
Yeah.
So I was going to techno parties, hearing the Willies, hearing Richies, going to Checkpoint Charlie, all these kind of biology was another rave that used to happen at the Powerhouse in Albert Park. So there was all these underground techno clubs and events, but there's also the underground house gay scene, right? So there was two kind of, and that's where Gavin was really at the forefront, you know, with his Savage and his Tasties. So as a 16-year-old kid, I'd be going to biology, I'd be going to Tasty, I'd be going to Temple. So I was exposed to this at a really young age, and that's what me as a punter fell in love with, you know, and that's why. I think from there was a big influence between, you know, you meet certain people in your journey, and Jay Snipe was the guy that, you know Jay Snipe, DJ?
No, I don't know.
Ah, okay. Jace was a techno DJ, and I came from the club scene, he came from the techno scene, but we moved in together, and I exposed him to the club scene, and he exposed me to the techno scene, and that's when I started having my own footprint in the techno scene, and I remember giving Richie a demo tape.
Actual tape?
Cassette. Right?
How'd you even record onto a tape?
I can't remember. I gave him it would have been vinyl at home and you press record, you know, so analog. So I remember I gave him, because he ran a club called Chinese Laundry. So I wanted to play at Chinese Laundry and I wanted to play for Gavin. So I said, I want to play for these guys because I love the music they're pushing and I love they had a really, being DJs themselves, they had more of a creative, obviously business-minded, but music was the priority. Yep. You know, Gavin would choose a lineup, not because Simon was the flavour of the month. He would choose a lineup and he'd curate those lineups very carefully, knowing what the DJ plays. So he wouldn't say to me, play this. He'd say, I'm putting you on this room at this time. And Richie was the same, the way he approached the lineup, as opposed to other promoters that weren't DJs.
Gotcha.
Right? So that's why I thought there was a credible path, and it's what I followed as a punter. I ended up creating my own space in those. Like I worked for Gavin a lot, so I had this house thing that I always loved playing house, and I was pushing that Daft Punk kind of, the French disco house.
Yep.
That's when I really discovered myself as a DJ, and that's where I was playing at a club called Uranus.
Yep, I know it. One of Gavin's clubs, yeah.
Yep. So I was playing at Uranus, but the night before I'd be playing at a rave party. So it was quite funny. If you followed my DJ sets during the week, I'd be playing a techno party, then I'd be playing at a house party. So they kind of sat separately, my identities. But it was kind of the techno one that took off more than let's say not took off, but really made more of an impact to the wider audience,
And why do you think that was?
To label.
Yeah.
So Richie and I jumped on board. Like I said, I want to DJ Chinese Laundry, and his office was in Jeffcott Street, which was his lounge room. So I'd go to his lounge room and we'd start working on Chinese Laundry. And then from there, I think he'd done up to hardware 2 or 3. And then I came on board with the hardwares. So him and I was the wingman, and, we did the hardware series and Belfast series from, I don't know, probably I jumped on board maybe, 6 or 7, all the way through to, I don't know what number it was when I left.
So at that point, you become a promoter?
Yes, no. So yes, this is where I was a DJ, but back then, if you wanted to create a scene for yourself, or if you wanted to create a concept, let's say, you actually had to create it yourself because it didn't exist, right? So all of a sudden, you want to DJ at a club that's like this or an event that's like this, so you have to create it yourself. And obviously, when you start creating, you start becoming the guy that needs to do everything, So that's when I was finding myself. I was DJing at all these events like Richie was. Like Richie would do the morning cruise set. I'd do usually the set before an international or, like building up the room. He'd close the room. But the main time would always give it to someone else because they were probably better. And we had to run the event, So I was running these events with Richie. Like Shed 14 would get the keys a week before, and we'd have to set this thing up from ground up, So we're setting up 4,000 square metre warehouses with black plastic, and it was a real organic way of creating something, very creative.
Yeah, like proper raves, like underground raves. Yeah.
So, and then with so I'm talking about the rave journey, let's say, or the techno journey. So then we started Hardware Records, So I was running the touring and the events, mainly the events. And then Damo and Willie ran the record store. So we actually created a community. And that's when we left Jeffcott Street and went to Chatham Street and started Hardware Records and the office at the back. And that's when magic happened, Like we had a really good run. And, we're doing a lot of parties at the Palace. Laurent Garnier and Carl Cox at the Palace was phenomenal gig. Phenomenal, And there was a couple of people doing the same thing because that's when it started not breaking away. Like there was obviously other people that wanted to do the same thing that got influenced. I'm not saying we were the first, but there was other people doing it like Spiro from Earthcore.
Yep. Mark James.
Yeah. Funny story there. I'll tell you that one in a minute. Richard Marr, So then there was these promoter wars,
And they got pretty heated back then, didn't they?
I was gonna swear. They got very heated, mate. And I never liked confrontation. So, I'd be out, I'd work in the office all day, at the setting up the event. And then me and Jeff Tyler and whoever was around would jump in a van, get posters, flour and water, and go down Chadstone, wherever we had to go and start doing posters. So we were doing our own poster runs, right? And that's how hands-on we were with these events. But then if someone was doing an event on the same weekend, they'd put their poster over ours. So there was some really, let's say, I'm not going to say gangster stuff, but there was some really confrontational moments.
I know the yarns. I've heard about promoters like literally fighting each other in the street. Like there's one in Greville Street that involves a few people we know.
That was, there was one particular event. I outsmarted Spiro. I remember this one. I said, you know what? He's doing this rave. He was doing his festivals, in the middle of nowhere, 2 hours out of Melbourne on the Hume Highway. Thinking, how are we going to promote hardware out there? Like, what are we going to do? And I remember hiring a road sign. You know those keep left signs, the ones they illuminate on construction?
Yeah.
I remember hiring one of those, and I put it like 2 kilometres before the entrance for Earthcore, saying, hardware 10, whatever it was. So I was promoting our event with a road sign. And I remember there was one particular moment, I got a call from the hire company, and they said, mate, our sign's smashed, So there was a lot of that stuff going on because we're all very passionate, and it was competitive to a certain degree, even though there was less going around. There was only certain weekends you can actually do, there was key weekends in their calendar.
Yep.
And Stereosonic, they picked the perfect weekend. It was when is it?
First week of December it was.
Yep.
Always.
Yeah, and the other one, which was the other one that everyone wanted. So there was always competition around that time of the year, with these poster wars. And the other one was March, right? Grand Prix weekend.
Yep.
I'll tell you a story how Two Tribes started, right? So I was with Richie. I was part of the Richie clan, and there was Mark doing the Renaissance. He was doing the Club C Mansion. And Kiss FM was going on then. Kiss FM was huge, and a lot of people were promoting through Kiss. Music was getting pushed through Kiss. Every DJ that had a shift at a club, your Frankies, whoever, they all had a show on Kiss. So it was really a true indication of the Melbourne music scene from all genres, from Bobby Love to Wayne Fernandez. Kiss FM was pinnacle, I think, to bring it all together, and we approached Timmy Burns saying, hey, we were doing Ian Pulley and I forgot who the other artist was, as a hardware event. So I rang up Timmy. I said, Timmy, we want to do the final broadcast for Kiss FM at our event, which obviously, expose our event to the masses. And he goes, mate, I've got a problem. He goes, Mark and Jace have asked me to do the same thing for their event. And he goes, I don't want to cause any problems. And it was kind of like big rivals, they were doing their thing, we were doing our thing, but there's always these crossovers, especially with venues, And Rafi was on board with that crew because they were doing a particular event, and I forgot what it was. It was Rafi. It was a club event, right? So it was Rafi, Mark James, Jason Obi, and me and Richie were doing the techno one. And me and Rafi were close. And we're like, mate, what are we going to do? Like, Mark's not budging, Richie's not budging. They would not budge, right?
Never.
And I'm like, there's a way around this. And me and Rafi said, mate, why don't we just do a party together? We'll do it at Shed 14, right? You take one half, we'll take the other half. And that's when we came up, Two Tribes Go to War. It was based on a Frankie Goes to Hollywood track, right? Because instead of going to war, we became Two Tribes.
Yep.
So that's how we came up with the name Two Tribes.
Yeah, I knew that. It was two groups coming together.
Yeah, so it was. So that's when we started. That's when Two Tribes was started, and I remember the first Two Tribes. I still got a copy of it. I did the mix because we used to promote events with CDs. CDs were a really good promotional tool because you're promoting music and talking about your event. So I remember the first Two Tribes promotional campaign had a Mark James CD, and I did the other one. So we're playing techno in one room, house in the other.
Yeah, wow. And they were Shed 14, like what was the capacities and like those sort of venues back then?
Mate, we hit record numbers, man. Like I remember I used to work, because I was doing all the production at Shed 14 under the hardware banner. So I used to work a lot with Also Foundation. So what we'd do is, Tracy Wall was the production producer of Also, which was Winter Days, all those big,
Yep.
That were remarkable events, remarkable. So we'd make sure that we'd choose the same weekend. That she'd do a party on one night, we'd do a party on the other night, but we used the same production.
Yeah,
so
still a common thing now. People still do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what did you ask me? Oh, Shed 14. So I remember they used to always pull the big numbers. They used to get 3,000, 4,000 to Winter Days. We were getting 2,000s to a normal hardware. With CJ Boland, with Jeff Mills, we were probably getting 1,700 at a bad hardware to, I think CJ Boland was probably on the biggest at the time, and I think we were probably getting 3,000, right? Also, we're getting 4,000s, and I used to always think, how do you get to that level? Two Tribes, the first one, we hit 8,000.
Yeah, wow.
And I remember how big it felt, like it went from, we had the small office when it was purely hardware, and Richie and Richie's dad and mum would be in there in the accounting room, doing the tills. So it was a very mum and dad operation. And all of a sudden, I thought, wow, we've created a monster.
Yep.
We had the whole future, there was a money counting room.
Yeah,
You know
wow.
what I mean? Like, wow. Everyone had radios, So that's when I thought, wow, this is now on.
It was Two Tribes annual or was it? There was
No, it was annual.
Yeah, it was an annual event, right?
It was March 12th.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that ended up moving to like Rod Laver by the end of it, right?
Yeah, it was. We did it. I don't know how many. I can't remember how many I did. But yeah, Shed 14. And it's funny. And then I took Shed 14 over for Alumbra.
Yeah, I was going to say.
So yeah, Shed 14. Then there was a big one called Welcome 2000, which was basically a hardware and future entertainment. It was another collaboration. Did you hear about that one?
Nah, I've never heard of that one. No.
Welcome 2000 was the Millennium.
Yep.
So we did that down at, I don't know it's further down. So basically Docklands was all warehousing, Shed 14 and Shed 9.
I know, yeah, the one you're talking about is on the left-hand side, like further up to, the river.
What for?
For their second other warehouse that people used to use back in the day.
There was another two,
Yep.
right? So we used to just go around on rounds and see what's around. There was one particular warehouse that had had a shed. It was like a big shed, but it had two openings, like an airport hangar. And we did Apollo there. Did you ever hear about Apollo Festival?
I did, yep. I know
That
about Apollo.
was
Yeah,
that
Daft
was
Punk there in 1998 or something, right?
that was monumental. You
Yeah.
know, way ahead of its time. I think we lost shitloads of money. I think from memory, but we had Daft Punk. I was running the techno stage. Terry Thompson and Jeremy Jolson were doing the Daft. We all had, Rafi had his club thing. We brought all the scenes together. There was Frankie Knuckles' room. It was like gay music. It was techno music. So I remember we did the Jeff Mills. Can't remember who else. Richie Horton in the techno room.
Yeah, wow.
Big lineups.
Yeah, still massive to this
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
And so what kind of numbers was that doing, Apollo?
Apollo, it became a different business then.
Yeah,
Our break-evens were a certain amount, when we were doing it at Shed 14. But then it became, I'm not going to say overkill, but that's when it became a festival.
Yeah,
not a dance party. Probably I'd say Shed 14 with dance parties.
Yep.
A festival is, it's a circus. You got food, you got this, it's a circus,
Of course.
So that's when it became big break-evens. So I would want to quote it.
Yeah, okay. So winding back to the DJ stuff, right? So obviously, Melbourne's coming through, techno's getting bigger and bigger. There's clubs like Express, Temple, there's
Yeah.
clubs like Uranus that are sort of heroing it. There's little pocket raves all over the city. What did it feel like to be a DJ in that period?
Fucking amazing, and it's and if you weren't DJing, you'd want to go. Oh, that's how I was anyway. If I wasn't on the lineup, I wouldn't. I want to go as a punter, and you used to see industry people on the dance floor too. You know what I mean? It was just we created something, So there was it was more as if you're the DJ, I'm the punter,
Yep.
And it was very communal. I remember Uranus. So I'd be because I did a whole club thing. I was doing Uranus, I was doing Prince of Wales on a Sunday, and I was doing Saratoga.
Yep.
So I was doing Saratoga, Redhead as well. So I had, and that's how me and Jace Knipe influenced each other. I'd go support him at a rave, and then I'd start liking what's going on, and then he'd support me and introduce me to people. I'd support him and introduce him to people in clubs, and he actually became a very well-respected club DJ. He was one of the only ones that bridged from techno to clubs.
Yeah, wow.
But I remember playing at Toga, and I'd have to leave Toga at 2 a.m. and go play at every picture, And people couldn't get their head around, how can you just go play Carl Craig house music and then go play a banging Jeff Mills track? But it's good music.
Yeah, 100%.
It's just good music.
Yeah, great music.
Yeah.
And every picture, that's one that gets brought up all the time.
Yeah.
How important was every picture to the scene?
Oh, no, they were the full creatives. Richard and Heidi and Phil Voodoo. I used to go to their parties to get inspired because they were artists. They weren't DJs. Me, Richie, were DJs. So there was hardware, there was earthcore, there was every picture, and then there was the one Mushroom started doing. I forgot what that was.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, they were doing parties as well, but they were more so from a corporate perspective. But yeah, the ones at Footscray, they started off at Footscray, every picture, in these dilapidated warehouses, which I then eventually bought a warehouse and lived there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that's where the Wet Musik studio was. So I lived in one of the warehouses when they redeveloped it. So they still kept the sawtooth shells warehouses, and that's where I actually lived and had to do a Wet Musik studio.
So on the Wet Musik thing, for those that don't know, you combine with Willie Tell, another super prominent techno artist that's, you know, gets brought up in every single podcast I do.
Everyone, mate. What's
Loves
happened
him.
to Willie?
Yeah.
Where's Willie? So the let's say the journey from me going from hardware to Wet Musik was such a hard decision to make, because me and Richie were inseparable. Like we had a really good run, and I ran it like it was my own business, even though it wasn't. But that's how we work, right? And there was, let's say, an emotional connection with the connection with the brand. But what ended up happening in my head, right, was I said, I'm not DJing anymore. Like, I want to just DJ. I don't want to run a party. So I got actually tired of running parties because it was impacting my music and my ability to focus on my DJ sets, right? So I'd be DJing at a hardware party and someone would be tapping my foot, hey, we need to do this. You know, so it wasn't allowing me to just be creative. So that's when I said, I'm not doing this anymore, right? And Willie's like, mate, I want to start this label. So that's when we started Wet Musik. And Willie was working in the record shop and I was working in the back office. So we'd catch up for lunch breaks, go to the bakery, and I'd be like, mate, because I used to see Willie, he'd only DJ. He'd rock up, DJ, and go. Or hang out and go. I'm like, that's all I want to do, you know? Instead, I'm running the whole event. And so it took away from my music. So we started Wet Musik, which had two meanings. We had a DP4 effects unit. So you had a dry signal or a wet signal. And a wet signal is a signal with effects on it, like a delay or something. So we always had a multi-tap delay on our DP4 in our rack. So we always say, let's go wet. And then we realize, will he tell? So that's where Wet Musik started from. And what we did was, we just didn't want to be DJs. And we thought the only way to break ground internationally is to write music, right? And that's why we started Wet Musik. And then what I managed to be able to create with Willie was the whole thing was a collaboration between bringing Australian artists to the global platform. So I had quite a big network with the international DJs. So for example, at the time, you know, it was Jamie Bismeyer and the space DJs, Ben Sims, Adam Bayer, all those guys I knew personally, Christian Smith. So all those guys I was touring with hardware became personal friends of mine. And then I started the label and I'm like, mate, we've just done a track. Do you want to remix it for us? Because that would get our music to the global market. And that's how we started the label. So we primarily started writing music as our way to hit a bigger audience.
Crazy.
And then we started the parties because we needed a platform to promote this locally.
And build an audience.
Yeah.
So when you say like start a label, right? Like so these days you go find a distributor, it's relatively easy. You upload it, it can go straight to every single streaming platform. What was it? Like how did you start a label? Obviously it's a name, but like pressing records, making music, like how was that process?
So it was all on that. So you'd have your MIDI, it was all MIDI, right? You know, I remember seeing a photo recently, because I lived in a warehouse in South Melbourne, and that's where we had the Wet Musik studio. So Willie would come over every day. I'd come downstairs and we'd start writing music. We had these big monitors, you know, big screens, and the storage backup units, those zip drives. So it was a really analog way of writing music. But what you do is you'd put it all through a mixer. It wasn't digital mixers back then; it was analog mixers, and then you run it to DAT. From DAT, you'd have to send the DAT tape to a vinyl pressing plant. You get acetate. So we're all getting acetates.
Yep.
So acetate was when the only opportunity we have to hear this tune out on a dance floor.
So you're getting, say, Adam Bayer to do a remix, right?
Yeah.
How the fuck are you even giving him the parts to remix it to send it back?
Yeah, through a zip drive.
Yeah, okay. So you still were using digital platforms at that point too.
Yeah. Look, it was all digital. We were running Pro Tools or audio, Logic Audio, but all our outboard gear was analog.
Crazy.
And I've still got the analog gear, you know?
Yeah.
So it's analog running through an analog mixer, but you're running your sequencing through Pro Tools or something like that.
So you start doing the Wet Musik parties. I think they were called Volume 1, Volume 2, so same sort of thing.
Yeah, so I didn't want to have a conflict of interest and start becoming a promoter again. So we only kept them small. And the first one was at Festival Hall. So what we did was it was all about the release. It wasn't about the party and trying to get big numbers. And we didn't have a VIP area and all that. Everyone was a VIP. And it was just me and Willie saying, hey, come to our party. We're launching our next track. So we made it more about the track, not about running parties. And we never got internationals at our parties. It was only the local DJs, you know. So they start off really small, I think 100 people. And then the second one was Story Hall. And that was, have you seen footage of that one?
I've heard about it. So like in my research for today, it kept bringing it up over and over again, Wet Musik, Story Hall. So tell us about it.
We made sure that the venues we chose were unique, right? Because I had a real clear vision of wanting to be different to what we were doing in your hardwares and whatever. We didn't want to choose the same venues, we were doing the same thing, right? And they were doing it, and they were doing it for a long time and doing it properly. So the second one was I was always on the hunt for different venues. And I remember seeing RMIT Story Hall in Russell Street. It's a green building.
Yeah.
It's a unique building. I'm like, what do they do there? So I remember going there and talking and negotiating, and hey, can we do a party here? We don't do parties here, but we did one. And that's when what we did was we incorporated visuals. And so we had some really cutting edge visuals going on. So we had screens. It became more of a show, right? And even Willie and I, our DJ sets, would bring out the 909. So we were trying to incorporate our live music within our DJ sets. But Story Hall that's when we really made an impact. You know, that's when people said, shit, these guys are doing something super cool.
Yep.
And we had a unique sound, you know. The sound was, I'd say, Willie had a big influence on the sound. And DJing with him, by his side, being his DJ partner, was the hardest fucking gig in the world, mate. And he was brilliant DJ. You know, like he was a hip hop, his technique was hip hop, but playing techno.
Yep.
You know, he was doing stuff that I remember he'd do a support and we used to always give him the warm-up set for any DJ, like Jeff Mills, Coxie. I remember Coxie saw Willie play at Palace. It was Carl Cox and then Lauren Garnier. But Willie played before Carl. And I remember Carl said, who's this guy? Can he come on tour with me? So every artist that he played before, they always pull me up and say, that guy is brilliant. You know, so he was doing stuff, playing records backwards by, you know, putting something on the turntable. So DJing with him I had to be on top of my game, you know, and he used to play really fast. So I slowed him down a bit and he sped me up a bit. But we did some really good gigs together and we became a non-political artist, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
So we'd play for Every Picture, we'd play for Richie. And we said, guys, we know there's crews and posses because it became very like clubs now. You know,
It's funny because you use two tribes as the term, right? We go there, but it's tribal. Like that's the word. And like it goes on now, still before. It's been forever. Like as long as there's been clubs, there's been tribes and there's been people fighting and warring one another.
That's right.
So it's like my generation, we did it too. Like we love each other, hate each other.
Correct.
Everybody's done the same thing. Yeah. But it's tribal. Like that's the best word.
Is that when we talk about Boris? My relationship with Boris? So yeah, and again, the whole thing's driven by passionate people, you know? And if there wasn't that kind of butting heads or whatever you want to call it, we'd be doing day jobs.
Yeah, and there'd be a lot of music events and parties that didn't exist because people are trying to outcompete one another. And it's like, it's healthy in a sense that without that, you don't have some of these major fucking names and festivals and DJs that people come out without the tribal wars, right?
Yes, within reason. You know, there needs to be some sort of, let's say, it works better when everyone's communicating, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. So
It comes and goes though, as you know.
yes, that's right.
So going back to the Willie Tell, you guys are joining up together. You're playing all these raves.
So we're playing. You know, I remember. You know, we used to play at Salt. We had a few residencies, so we'd play at Salt. They ran a techno night, so we're getting really what we're getting paid at the time, and what we were doing, like from let's say pulling numbers for a festival, we were worth having on your lineup. You know, and that's why we never wanted to grow our wet music parties too big, because once you grow your parties too big, you never get booked for the parties.
Yep.
So it was this real threshold. You have to keep under this threshold and focus on what are we? Stay in our lane. We're writing music and we're DJing. So that's what we focused on.
So where is Willie Tell?
Mate. So Willie, I spent a lot of time with Willie, as you can imagine, right? And then we brought Simon Call under our wing. So then we started saying, look, we've got to start doing touring, like touring our own artists. So Simon Call started the touring arm, but touring local artists, because we really wanted to promote local artists. And we're putting people like, who was on our lineup? So Alpha Risk. We were choosing people, and people come up to us, we'll be DJing, me and Willie, and they come up and give us their demos, you know, they're riding on Fruity Loops or whatever. And we're like, mate, there's something about this guy, you know, young kid. Shane is actually his name. We did stuff with Wojtek, you know, so we're like, people were coming to us saying, here, listen to my track, whether we liked it or not, but if there was something there, we'd talk to them about it, let's do this, do that, but then we'd give them the exposure by getting someone to remix it for them, you know? So it was a real big community kind of collaboration approach, you know, with the label.
For sure.
Yeah.
So you move on from this, like Wet Musik, you're a DJ, you're doing everything under the sun, you're playing every fucking party there is, and then you decide to become a nightclub owner. The second part of your journey, you become a nightclub entrepreneur. You own clubs like Alumbra, Miss Collins, XE54. What makes you jump back into it?
Accidents, right? It's all about the journey, and it's all about, for example, I mentioned before, I used to always choose unique venues, right? I remember, and I was always a punter. So I was always, had my eyes and ears around. I went to this party once that a guy called Richard Marr, right? He used to run, Richard Marr was doing a lot of the Detroit stuff. Stacey Pullen, Carl Craig, Derek May, they were all Richard Marr's guys. And he was doing things called Electric and Rendezvous. They were his parties. He did a rendezvous party with Derek May and Jeff Mills at a warehouse in South Wharf. I'd never been there. And this warehouse was old timber planks of wood, like as the floorboards, and there was gaps. And everyone was smoking, you know, that's what they do back then. Everyone was smoking. And what was happening, the smoke was going, the cigarette butts were going and actually caught on fire, right? So it was a crazy event, but Jeff Mills played there, and I loved that venue. So then I wanted to find out who actually owned the venue, and found out this, who became our business partner, a guy called Haddam, had the lease on that venue. So I started asking him, we want to do a rave here. And he goes, mate, we're not doing raves. We're actually going to do an event space. And then we started talking. He goes, have you ever thought about doing a bar? A bar? And I think I was 30 back then. I'm like, never thought about doing a bar, but kind of sounds good, because what I wanted to do was, the scene was going in a different space, the clubs, you know, the mansions, mega bars, all these things were, it seemed like they'd done their time, you know? And I thought, where can you go hear good music? So I can't remember what was around at the time, but the club scene was going through it just seemed like a shift. So I thought, where can you go to get good cocktails and hear good house music? And that's when the whole concept of Alumbra came. So that's how Alumbra started.
And what does Alumbra actually mean?
It was a palace in Spain, you know. So when you walked in there, you felt like you were in Morocco. It was amazing space, you know. We were the first ones, and I felt there was a lot I took out of what we did at Shed 14, because it was literally a warehouse. You know, we set up a cocktail bar in the middle of nowhere. You know, that's where South Wharf, that's where what's that hotel now? It's the hotel. South Wharf, near Crown Casino.
Which one? There's fucking heaps now.
Yeah, I know.
TFO
yeah.
or whatever.
Can't remember which one. Well, they're the ones that took it off us. So no, I can't remember the hotel. So anyway, back then there was nothing there, right? There was nothing at South Wharf. So we thought, you know what? For an event space, because my partner was doing weddings. So for a wedding, it was quite easy. You know, you invite people, they know where to go.
Yep.
For a weekly bar, to try and inform people to go to this warehouse in the middle of nowhere, and the car park was pretty barren. There was nothing around, but it was on the water. So it was on the water, and it was in a warehouse. And I thought we could do something really special here, and that's when we created Alumbra. So the capacity was like maybe 150, but it turned over so many people. And the model was the Chasers model, you know, every night, because then I started bringing obviously, you know, the DJs and the music cocktails. So I'm doing Latino. Every night was its own business. And that's where I think Chasers is a remarkable club, because I used to go to Chasers Wednesday for Hard and Fast, you know, and Thursday for Fat, R&B, Friday for Techno Express, and Hysteria. So I was going to Chasers 3 nights a week. I'm thinking, how am I going to the same venue 3 nights a week and still loving it? Because the music, they had a real clear music direction. So I had a clear music direction, and I used to have Frankie D and Angela Mason on a Sunday with live music, and house music on a Saturday. Friday, I had the boys involved. And that's when the whole next scene started, you know. So I met these kids through my sister, and, you know, Nick Vass, Steve Blease, all that crew. And they were doing a night in suburban Essendon, you know, at some bar.
Would it in one bar probably?
I think it was.
Or Deluxe or one bar,
Now it's your era now. It's coming,
it's
isn't it,
coming
right?
into my era. This is my Illuminati.
Yeah. So I met the boys, and I'm like, we need to do something on a Friday, because I could never make the Friday work. And Thursdays was Latino. So, you know, I was doing like a night cat kind of vibe. So these boys started running a Friday night. And this Friday night that's when it became a nightclub, you know. Saturday was a cocktail bar with house music. But then there was a line around the corner, and then that flowed on to the other nights, you know. And that's when they started their nightclub career, you know. And Steve, his DJ career, Steve Blease.
Yeah.
So that ran for many years, 2000 to 7 years. And we had our challenges, you know, because they started building the hotel there. So we're having all these obstacles. And then we finally had to leave. And that was a real pinnacle moment. Do you give up, or what do you do? And we found Shed 14. Shed 14, they wanted to redevelop that.
It was a little bit bigger than 200 cap, that joint.
100%. And so there was Shed 14 and Shed 9. And what happened was, all the owners of venues in South Wharf, because there was multiple owners, I had Alumbra, which was a small venue amongst many function venues, because it was a function precinct. So what happened was, it was a pretty shit situation. Well, we got dealt with the lease and the government. So we relocated. So basically all the business went over there, and we had to cut these warehouse up, Shed 14 and Shed 9, into different sections. So we redeveloped that. And Shed 9 was the one I wanted to do Alumbra, because it was a bit smaller, and we chose the end of the pier purely because you get the sunset. And when we lost the original Alumbra, South Wharf, we were going to do another location, but I didn't want to do it because when you do a second venue, like the trilogy, it's either make or break. And that's why I've never done a Wet Musik reunion. So, because we want to leave it as it was.
The legacy.
You know? Yeah, the legacy. And so, had to be in a warehouse, had to be on the water. And once again, doing a cocktail bar or a nightclub, became a nightclub then. That's when it changed from a cocktail bar, play good music, to a super club.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's when I thought, whoa, I've started this animal now, and taken all these guys on a journey with me. So that became my primary focus.
Yeah, and so then Wet Musik stops then, or are you still working on the
Oh,
background?
no, Wet Musik stopped. I think it was around the same time, because back on the Willie was a unique character. You know, he was so one lane, and that's why he was the best DJ. He only, and that has its pros and cons, but whatever he wanted to do, he'd just go nuts and do one thing. So he wanted to start doing, I think it was property at the time. So he just went on this thing, and he's 100% or nothing. So that's how it went for Willie, you know? And then I forgot how, I think we stopped doing the whole release thing and we just ran the touring, I think with them, with Simon Call, the bookings. But that's when I think the opportunity came up. Actually, that's right. Yeah, it was around the same time.
Transition.
Yeah, transition.
It's funny you say that. Like, there's another guy that used to play Alumbra all the time for you guys, Stevie Mig, but he was the same. Like, he was he got humongous. He started like releasing on spinning, and he just decided, not for me anymore.
Yeah.
And the same thing. I always get people like, "What's he doing now?" I'm like, he's moved into property. He's doing whatever he's doing." But he's 100%, or it was 0 for him. And he's one of those guys. It happens all the time. Like, they just go and disappear.
Yeah.
But they just decided that it's time for them to move on.
There's almost like no emotional connection. You know, it's literally, you know, tunnel vision. But look, I think it's all about timing, you know, and I think for me, you know, I'm talking about all these phases. Sounds confusing, but it all seemed to flow.
Yeah,
you know?
it does, yeah.
And it's knowing when to call it, you know, and not holding on to things too long, you know. But look, Alumbra became its own icon.
Monster,
It's unbelievable, man.
Still
like,
running to this day. Like,
unbelievable.
Not under your guys'
This
umbrella.
is my Boris story, you know. But look, you know, I always looked at Chasers as like, because I grew up there, you know, it's still going, right? But I looked at a brand like Alumbra and I thought, you know what? I've actually been able to, we've been able to create something magical, you know? And we just replicated the same formula as the old Alumbra on bigger scale.
Yeah.
You know, we had a live music on Sunday. We had, you know,
Soul sessions
alone. So we built brands within brands.
Yeah.
You know?
Even me, like towards the end of it, just before they shut it down, I was doing Debbie Does, which is probably my most iconic
That's
nightclubs.
right. Yes.
We were doing fucking 1,800 people during the day there.
Yeah,
like,
I remember that party.
made some good coin.
Thank you. I remember, Bardes was DJing.
Yeah, we had Bartes orchestrate all those boys. Heath
and you know, being a nightclub owner, the funny thing is it kept me involved in your generation and the music. And I remember, because the music started changing. And, you know, I was cool about it, but I didn't want to play there anymore.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't want to play. Like, I used to play in the bar, and I'm like, no, they don't want to hear this anymore, you know? And they wanted to hear, you know, I remember we booked Avicii for the first time, you know? And what we paid for him, it's none of anyone's business, but it was a club show, so it wasn't much, you know? But we were pushing good music, you know, through the boys. They had a really good, they were in touch with the music scene, you know, and that's when the whole what was it called? That
like EDM is what they were calling
EDM,
it. But
that's
Afro,
So we moved to EDM the right time, you know, and that's where I had really good affiliations with the guys from Paradise Club in Mykonos, because like they were trying to do their lineups for summer, right, in Mykonos, and the market was Australian people. We're like, mate, go to EDM, you know. So EDM took off, you know, and that was not my wave, but I respected it.
Yeah.
And then went to bounce. And I remember we used to do these parties. What's going on with this music? Like, but it evolved, and it should evolve. You know, can't be one of those people that say it needs to stay the same. It wouldn't be right.
No.
You know? Whether you like it or not is very subjective.
But then you look back at Alumbra, and the reason why I was so successful was that I was able to bring in all these like rave kids, really, like during the day.
Yep.
Like fucking guts full of pingers. And then afterwards, you would have this really classy sort of like,
Yeah.
you know, inner city kind of like the guys at Nick Vasson that would bring down.
Yeah, yeah.
Then on Sunday, you'd have all the
I
R&B
know.
heads.
I know. It was like literally, it was a space.
Yeah.
You know, we created a space, and you know, we obviously designed it in a way that you could actually make it smaller if you needed to. And that was, as a promoter, it was a big tool to have only half the venue open.
Yep.
And it doesn't look empty, you know?
Yeah, it was sexy too. It was a sexy venue.
Yeah,
So
it was
did you
different.
own it when they closed it down? The government closed it down?
Oh, yeah, I remember getting the phone call.
So can you run us through that, like how that all happened?
No comment.
Okay.
No, I was, remember getting called, because I was, like there was, and all those boys, like all the promoters became partners with us, because it started off a certain group of people, but then everyone had such an important role in it, you know, and it was about the succession planning of that venue, which is why it was really important to get people on board, you know. But I was kind of handling that high level stuff, let's say. And I remember getting the call, and our business partner also had the head lease. So he actually, it was a Wednesday night, and all the, let's say, subleases, so the wool shed, there was all the peach shop, there was all these things, we're on a call. And they go, they've closed down our venue. Like, what do you mean? It didn't click, right? It didn't click. and thought it probably, but WorkSafe came in, and I won't get into technicalities, but it was deemed unsafe. And as you can imagine, shattered all of us. We've lost our baby, our baby, and ringing up, with the ring up the promoters, with the ring up our staff, it was just chaos, absolute chaos. And we weren't even allowed to go back and collect our stuff off the pier.
Really?
We had one opportunity. It was just like, it was something out of the movies. And then maybe a week later, I said to the boys, you know what? It's the best thing that could happen. We ended this thing off on a high, right? And it became an icon, just like, what is it, the 28 Club, all those artists that died at 28?
Yeah.
They became generational because they never had a bad track.
That's something that you and I share, because I used to always, as soon as I could see that downward trend, I would just end my nights. And I'm like, I don't want it to be the point where it's like, I got real flogged at the end. It's
That's right.
That's how you keep them iconic. It's because you end them when they're not in their peak, but they're decline. It's just a small decline.
You don't want to flog the dead horse and become sad.
And that's like when I spoke to Gavin. Gavin mentioned the same thing. He's like,
what did he say about it?
Well, he said Tasty got closed down, but it was at its peak. And he's like, Razor, they lost their lease, so it was at its peak. So all these iconic nightclubs you talk about, they normally get cut from the knee at some point, or they get stopped out of nowhere.
Yeah, and look, we did a renovation in Alumbra. We always kept on reinvesting, and we were very hands on. But reality is, the job was going to get harder, and it needed a change. There's other things going on. So yeah, I thought it was a blessing.
Yep.
Then Miss Collins,
XE54.
XE54. That was the best club.
Yeah. Why do you say that?
Because it was something that wasn't necessarily the most financially beneficial club, but it's like, for me, it was more like, man, I'm doing something I love again. You know what I mean? Like, it was like, from a creative look, all our venues, I really always had an idea which we like to turn into a business, So Miss Collins, there was a story to it, It was this glitzy venue. We got in there with spray paint. We made it more edgy and more, let's say, white. What's that? Off-white. It was like kind of an off-white vibe to it. So it was creative, but luxe, and that's where Miss Collins. So that was the concept there. Obviously, XE. My first love for music was probably Love Parade 1996, right? So that was my first Love Parade. So I went there. I can't remember how old I was, but I got exposed to the most underground things you'll ever see in your life, Love Parade, 1 million people street party. And then there was the offshoot parties like Tresor, and like Richie Horton would be playing in it was like a swimming pool, like a, what do they call, like they empty the water. So it was an indoor swimming pool, like the aquatic centre.
Yep.
They'd empty the water, and that's where the party was, inside a pool, right? And Sven was playing outside Tresor. So it's called Love Park. So the next day after Love Parade, Sven would do a 12-hour set outside in the car park of Tresor. And I went to that. It was like gated up. You had to get in there. But it was 12-hour sets, Berlin, 1996. Magic. And I looked at what happened to the Alumbras, Miss Collins, and I couldn't relate to it anymore. It became a business for me. And that's what I found more, let's say, more what I should focus on. How do we keep these things running? How does society keep it as a business? Was a skill in itself. But then XE, we took over Eve nightclub, glamorous, ritzy, champagne, Instagram, the whole kickaboodle. And like we did with Miss Collins, I wanted to flip it on its head. And, at the time, myself and Nick Vass, it was my business partner, really good friend, and went with Jägermeister to a Jägermeister tour with all the alcohol reps. I did a sneaky trip to Berlin because my cousin lives there. I went to Bergheim at the early stages, and I went back there and I was with Nick. So Nick didn't see all this stuff that, Temple, he didn't see that, right? He went clubbing when there was telephones. I went clubbing before there was telephones. So we have a much different perspective on what a club should be. And as I said earlier, a club should be an escape. And I went to Bergheim and I'm like, fuck, I feel like I'm at home. I feel like I'm at Tasty. I feel like I'm at hardware. I feel like I'm back where I was. And all it was being in a cool venue with cool music with no phones, you know? So, and I wanted to do a no phone policy at XE, but no one would let me do it. But what we did was we tried to bring a bit of that old school, rustic, raw vibe to nightclubs. And I think working with the boys, we were very selective on who could execute what we wanted to do musically.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying musically, it's more so from a community.
Yeah.
And the Beyond the Valley boys, they got it right. You know, like they're punters that have turned into festival promoters,
100%.
right? And that's what I love about the boys. Like I've done a few gigs for them, even from a production perspective. And I remember seeing Mick and all the boys, they were dancing.
Yeah, they
you
were.
know, you know what I mean?
I
Like,
was with them at Pitch 2 weeks ago watching too many DJs and they were like up there for a little bit and they were in the crowd not long after.
that's what I mean. It's like, so I really resonate with the way they approach what they do. And that's why we gave them the keys to run the night, you know? And that's why, because also I think festivals were going through a funny stage, you know, too many festivals. So bringing that music to a club was really important, I think, for Melbourne.
Yeah, and it's been massive for them since because they've been able to break artists through XE54. It's a brand that still exists now.
Yeah.
Obviously started there, but it's like they've kind of, you know, created a subculture that's now broken into this massive market that they're able to do. These artists they used to do at XE54.
I love that.
At BTV, you know?
Yeah,
so
yeah,
they've
yeah.
educated the new generation in a sense.
Yeah, and similar to with Alumbra, like I love the fact that what we created, I'm not emotionally attached to them. And the fact that like when I got a call from Boris saying, do we still own the brand Alumbra, right? Because we got, you know, obviously we packed that up with the government and moved on. And that's when I moved to Bali. It was around kind of the same time anyway. But he said, I want to buy the brand Alumbra. Like, it was me and Tony at the time talking to Boris. And I was actually talking through Tony because Boris and I were always having head-to-heads, right?
I remember seeing some of them online.
Oh, yes, that one. Yeah, that was funny. That reminded me of the old poster wars, me and him. But once again, two passionate people. And that's what Boris and I actually resonate with. We both agreed that we're very passionate.
Yep.
And it's a smarter way of doing business. And when he wanted to do the deal on Alumbra in 5 days, I'm like, seems like a bit of a hurry to do the deal. In actual fact, he started Motel. So he moved the brand to Alumbra. And I still would get calls from people, could you put my name down Alumbra? So I love the fact that he's kept that legacy going. And there's now people that met at Alumbra, got married, had kids, and their kids are going to his Alumbra, you know? So it's nice.
It's fucking really cool, eh?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
an iconic name. How long has it actually been around for? Like 20 years probably?
No, well, we had Alumbra from the first one to the second one, 17 years.
17 years, there you
How
go.
did you have a nightclub for 17 years?
It's insane.
And that's why I also wanted to move on, because you don't want to be that guy that owned a nightclub or did the same thing for 17 years. You know, you become stale.
And that takes you to the next part of your journey. So you leave Melbourne and you move to Bali.
Yeah.
Tell us about what you're doing over there now. Have you sold out from all the clubs? Are you finished? Are you going to come back and do some DJing stuff? I know you're here on the weekend doing it. Like,
Mate,
what's
can I
next
tell
for
you, after what happened on the weekend, like, I love DJing still, you know what I mean? So playing on the weekend at Ministry of Sound was a real, how can I say, it was really nice to reconnect, you know? And I played in the main room after Andy. So I felt really comfortable because playing in a warehouse, I think now, for me, it was always I really like the sets that build the night. You know, I'm going to say the start, but to see a room evolve into creating an atmosphere, then to having it running as a dance floor, to be a part of that process, it takes, I think, a skill, and it's a psychology, I think, you know. Obviously, there's technical, but reading a room is a very psychological approach, I think. And in a warehouse that size, you're very disconnected from the crowd. So that's the first thing you have to compete with. And then how do you build an atmosphere in a big open warehouse, you know? So it's building blocks, you know? And that's how I approached the set on the weekend. I took it from ground zero and start off with this old house. And my music was prepared in my head based on 2 clubs that I used to play at that I really felt I owned those sets. And one was Prince of Wales on a Sunday. So I was the resident at Prince of Wales on a Sunday before One Love. And what I was doing there was every Sunday I'd play 10 to 1 and I'd have a guest DJ before me, and it was Jeanette's, you know, it was all Nigel Last, it was all housey guys, but I'd always take that last set, but I'd always start off with the same track, Shades of J, right? So I created my own anthems, and not because they were big tracks, because I liked the tracks. So anyway, I took a reset with This Old House, and I started off with This Old House. Do you remember that track?
Nah, I don't know. Now
It's
we're
on
gonna check
Open
it out on
Records.
YouTube.
Yeah, This Old House. Cool track, right? And it's a bit risky to start like this because you're starting from that BPM to like bang. So if it doesn't work, you kind of look like a dick, you know? But it's about knowing what the right track is to play at the right time and back yourself, you know? So I felt really comfortable. It was only an hour, you know, and, you know, that in itself kind of makes you rush it. You can't take that, you can only do what you want to do over 1 or 2 tracks, not 3 or 4. But I managed to get to where I wanted to halfway through. And then I was playing tracks that I really was pushing at Prince on a Sunday and Saratoga on a Saturday. Because they were 2 clubs that I loved playing at. Small, intimate, and I was able to build my own tracks there. Like Hail Bop by Doritarum was one track that I really pushed every set, and everyone will know if they hear that track, Simo's playing, you know. So, and end off with Carl Craig, you know, Climax, you know, the most amazing record.
Banger.
Do you know the track?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah, because that was a track I used to always play at Toga. But to play that in a main room, which I did at Ministry, you know, I don't know, it was at the end of my set, my last track, it kind of takes, let's say, confidence knowing it's a risky approach because people really want to, you think people want to do this, but they don't also, you got to read the room. And like, once I had him in my hand, I felt comfortable to say, you're going to hear this now and you're going to like it. So it was real art, you know, to play music. And I do miss playing music, but Bali for me was about moving on. So I'm not involved in the clubs anymore, but still have a real passion for the clubs doing really well. And they're probably doing the same, if not better, without me, which is always a good story to tell. And I love hanging out with the boys when I'm here. But Bali for me was about where do I want to be in my life and my family's life where I can create and not be, I'm going to be careful about my choice of words, not be like unmotivated. And I don't want to talk, I found Bali was more motivating for my style of business, my style of, and what we've created there, my partners and I who I met, they're from the other parts of the world. I DJ'd a lot personally through my whole career overseas. And so I got exposed to a lot of different cultures, and I realized the world is a big place, you know, and I realized that what we do, what you do, what we all do, everyone you've interviewed can actually do what they do anywhere in the world. And you don't need to be in the 4 walls or wherever they are, Australia, wherever. So Bali, I think, proposed a really good opportunity to do something creative and not have the boundaries that you might have here. Because I was very part of the liquor licensing and you know, the nightclub association. I was very committed to the industry, and I just started hearing a lot of voices, a lot of commentary with all the people in the scene from an owner level. You can't do this anymore, licensing, you know, and it just became, do I really want to put all my, let's say, all my blood, sweat and tears in an idea? Because that's what they are. They're all ideas, all the things we've said. Do I really want to put everything in and just get all the things thrown at me that could potentially not be able to create what? So I didn't want to have to deal with that kind of mentality anymore, you know. And doing business in place like Bali, they embrace design, and what you do is, I love building brands. If you probably reflect on my whole career, that's what I've probably done.
Yeah, definitely.
Build brands, you know. I'm not a nightclub owner. I've just built brands, and some have been nightclubs, some have been in DJing, some have been events. And Further Hotel is a brand that I've built, and I always knew if you did something right, especially in a place like Bali, which is a very international island, you can make an impact on the rest of the world. And without getting ahead of ourselves, we've created a worldwide, you know, hotel brand, which is very small, But from a design and concept perspective, we're really proud that it's a hotel category that doesn't exist, you know? So it's called Further Hotel.
Love it.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the perfect way to wrap this up. We've gone from like your beginning to the middle part and all the way at the end. And I think we did a fucking amazing job, man. So I want to say thank you so much for coming down. I really appreciate your time. I know you're only flying in and out. You're not here often. And thank you for inspiring my generation.
Oh, mate, I can see the glow in your eyes, man.
Thank you for building spaces that we were able to use and building stories that we're able to, you know, be motivated by and start our next generation. And hopefully one day I can do what you did to the next generation that you did to mine.
Yeah, man, awesome. And Danny, credit to you, mate. Like I saw that, you know, I've seen a few of your things, what you're doing here. You're creating a library. You know, this is really, really good what you're doing, you know?
That's what I'm trying to do.
So that's why I reached out and I'm glad we connected and straight away you're onto it because I wanted to share all these things in my head and what triggered all these things was playing a record, like hearing a record. I've still got my vinyl collection because that's like photos.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's how I see my collection. But hearing, you know, Rafi and the boys and Gavin Campbell, I'm like, wow, remember that. And there was so much you don't have time to talk about, you know?
It's important. People need to know about it.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming down, man. You're a legend.
Keep it up.
Thank you so much.
No worries, mate. Love your work, Danny. Thank you, mate.